I turn it over to Martin Hoshino for his Administrative Director's report.
Thank you, Chief. Members, in your written materials is my office's report to you of the activities, really of the staff operation in support of the goals of the council. It's the activities occurring since the last meeting in January, so it really encompasses about 2 months' worth of activity. Some of the things to note in there of the advisory groups that are advancing your goals and your objectives, there were approximately 18 of the different committees as well as work groups that convened to advance your direction. The other thing that I wanted to highlight that's in the report is a lot of the education and training activities that occurred. We had about 29 different education sessions and programs and opportunities that were offered either in person or online during this period. A couple of ones to highlight even within that, one related to interpreters, is that we actually conducted for the first time a mock criminal trial workshop for American Sign Language interpreters, which is really aimed at increasing service support to the courts and court users. And it was hosted by our partner court, graciously, the Yolo Superior Court. And there were also then a number of trainings that occurred related to implicit bias for judges, judicial officers, and employees and the like, as requested by particular courts in our system. And one thing that I want to spend a little bit more time describing is that we recently had all council staff members participate in some training sessions on inclusion and overcoming bias. It was a mandatory training. The title of the training actually is more of a workshop format. It was entitled Breaking the Prejudice Habit. And it comes and it spawns out of this notion that we do an awful lot of training in these subjects, in these areas, not just here, but everywhere in the state and in the country. And there's this growing sense among some of us that we've been discussing that maybe some of that training actually has gone quite stale. And I mean to be no disrespect to the training, but we have now got kind of into this rote habit of, yes, I take my discrimination training, I take my sexual harassment training, sometimes I do it online. Frankly, some of us have memorized the answers to the test that comes at the end of the session. And we spend time memorizing the EEOC Act. We spend time memorizing the legal standard that things have to be severe and pervasive. And we go through it, and yet, cyclically, episodically, here we are having some of the moments that we're having, not just in the workplace everywhere, but in this particular country. And so we went out and sought maybe a change or a reboot or a reset, and what could we find out there? And in our travels, in our efforts, our staff and I were able to uncover a group out of the University of Wisconsin who actually, the professor that we got is named Patricia Devine. She actually is the person who coined the term implicit bias some 20 or 30 years ago. So we went to the original source of all of this, only to find out and to learn that she doesn't call it implicit bias anymore. She calls it unconscious bias, and she is now taking an effort with her team to actually look for the empirical results of some of this training, because there's a lot of training that goes on. And the other question that we started to ask people is, how do you know your training makes a difference? And it's remarkably stunning that I shouldn't say without a doubt, and the answers are actually not very good. And a lot of people are providing a lot of training and not knowing whether or not it actually makes a difference. So there were two aspects of this, which was one, we went to the source that started a lot of this effort only to learn what she was doing, and also she was able to answer this question and show demonstrations as they follow groups that they train to see what kind of impact that it's actually happening. And so we were very encouraged by that. So we have gone through this exercise, again, at our level, at the staff level, for everybody here that works here. And we are talking about what the next steps ought to be. And so, and whether or not we can actually expand that, whether it can be a feature in our program, whether we can do it branch-wide, et cetera, et cetera. And so I wanted to spend some time kind of describing it to you. And the new approach has really been about, take a look at it as we have these unconscious biases, prejudice. If you look at it from the format that it is a habit, then habits can be broken. And so we came away with really a set of tools and advice about how you actually might go about breaking that particular habit once you recognize it. And so I'm sorry to spend so much time about it, but we got a little bit excited about it because we were on a search for something that was a little bit more deeper and a little bit more meaningful, and arguably we may have found it. So more to follow on that if it develops. The next thing I wanted to spend some time on is the California Judicial Conduct Handbook, which has been updated and revised and is either with you or on its way to you, courtesy of the California Judges Association, as something that they do on a regular basis. And the handbook is something that I know that as I talk to new judges and every judge in the system, they all attest to its value and consider it to be a really seminal publication in support of the work that the officers do. Our counsel, through the work of our legal services office, and in particular Mark Jacobson, plays a significant collaborative role on that. And I wanted to publicly recognize him, as well as the Judges Foundation and well as the California Judges Association, and what they do. The last comprehensive update was in 2007. So the new publication includes 10 years of new material on court cases, ethics opinions, judicial elections, and more. And it won't surprise anybody to learn that there's a section in there about social media as a new topic between 2007 and today. The central tenets of honesty and integrity in the judicial decision-making that are addressed in the handbook also actually provide a foundation for us in our current qualifying judicial ethics training program that the council coordinates for all judges. Next, a note on video remote interpreting the pilot project on language access. You will be pleased to learn that we are off the ground with in the live in-court testing phase for this particular project, and it'll be conducted over the next 6 months in the Superior Courts of Merced, Sacramento, and Ventura. And they will all be testing variations of the solutions that are designed to provide more interpreter services for limited English proficiency. So we're going to collect the data from all of that and the input from judicial officers, the court interpreters themselves, the public defenders, the district attorneys, the court staff, so that we can determine whether or not this is actually a viable solution for the judicial branch. The pilot will run until August, and so we'll be back to talk about those results in some form or some capacity to you all at that time. And lastly, no judicial council meeting could be complete without a comment about state budget. And this time I will talk mainly about where we are in terms of process. There isn't a lot to talk about in terms of the proposal, the content. I spent a lot of time on that at the last meeting because it had come, our meeting was just after the budget had been released. But where we are is the Legislative Analyst Office has published their report, first on current year revenues, which are holding steady and actually running above what projections and estimates are. That is a good thing. Certainly there is some volatility in the stock market, which generally has some effects, but we will see how that plays out during the course of the budget season. But so far, so good, and that certainly bodes well for the state and the legislature as it deliberates on the appropriation decisions that it will make this year. At the state level, with the chief's help and direction, we're continuing to have a lot of positive discussion with legislative members as well as the administration. The LA report itself is generally supportive, which is another good sign for us. It does not quibble with the proposal in terms of the amounts that are in there, but it does make some suggestions to the legislature that are more technical in how the appropriation ought to be made or not made, and whether or not things should be permanent or limited in scope. This is a common process, and so we will work through that, but we're pleased to see that there isn't any recommendations to date from the Leg Analyst Office of, well, you ought to reduce those amounts and the like. And so we're pleased to at least be in this particular position. So the hearings have been scheduled for us for our budget to be heard by both houses of the legislature. We have April 9th as our date from the Assembly, and we have April 19th as our date from the Senate. And then in terms of advocacy and support at the local level, it is going really, really well. There's a lot of great collaboration occurring, not just with us and the trial courts as there usually is, but us and the trial courts and all of our stakeholders and partners, including the Bench Bar Coalition. There are some meetings that are occurring locally with local courts as well as their local members of the legislature to get a better feel, a better understanding of what the issues and challenges is and how the funding will actually help resolve those issues for our users and their constituencies alike and benefit the community. And then there's a lot of back and forth between us and the trial courts on that. And so I'm pleased to report that those are going quite well. The feedback is positive, and people are talking and talking often and at length. We're also then in the midst of scheduling what we call non-duplicative meetings, because there's such a thing as overdoing it, and we don't want to do that either, because we want to have the legislature have time and space to be able to do its work. And so we're trying to make sure we're not duplicative in some of the things that we're doing as we coordinate with ourselves and the local courts and the Bench Bar Coalition, especially as they ramp up for their day in Sacramento, which coincides, as a matter of fact, with the Chief's State of the Judiciary address. So again, short version, things are positive. We're in process. We're now in the legislature, and that's kind of where we are, members. And Chief, that concludes my report for today.